The permission of our sponsor, Mr. President, for transparency's sake, Mr. President, so that our people and even SMNI will know the details of the budget, Mr. President.
And all news outlets.
Yes, all news outlets. Our people. Okay.
Yes, for the benefit of our brilliant minority leader and his favorite network.
Mr. President, may we know what happened to the level of the CIF, confidential and intelligence funds, Mr. President? If I remember correctly, at the NEP level, we started at 12 billion pesos, if I remember correctly. Now, what is now the level in the BICAM report, Mr. President?
It's the same as in the General Appropriations Bill that we got from the House, or the HGAB. It's 9.5 billion. We did not touch it, Your Honor.
9.5. So basically, what we get in the BICAM report is basically the GAB as far as the CIF is concerned, Mr. President, as to level and as to recipients, Mr. President.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Then, Mr. President, there are many reasons to vote in favor of the BICAM, but there are also, I think, some serious and grave concerns which we will have to raise, Mr. President, on the process of budgeting. I looked at the unprogrammed expenses, Mr. President. Unprogrammed appropriations, that's the correct term, Mr. President. And we are increasing it by, ito po, i-round off ko na lang po para mas madaling tandaan. We are increasing it by around 450 billion pesos. Ang original proposal po ng Presidente or ng Executive ay 281.9 billion pesos lamang sa NEP. And yet, ang ending po natin, 731.4 billion pesos or an increase roughly of 450 billion pesos as a result of the bicameral conference meetings, Mr. President. May we know what happened, Mr. President? How come it's more than doubling? It's actually close to tripling the proposed unprogrammed appropriations by the executive, Mr. President.
Well, yes, the gentleman is correct as to the figure, and the reason is to carve out fiscal space in the programmed appropriations for other items that are proposed by our colleagues, both here and in the House, Your Honor.
So binaba po natin, meron from the, meaning to say, amounts to the extent of 450 billion pesos where, gamitin ko na lang yung term, transferred or lowered from programmed appropriations to unprogrammed appropriations, Mr. President?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And what took their place, Mr. President?
Amendments to various departments, Your Honor, some of which we mentioned in our speech in support of the bicameral conference report, Your Honor.
And we needed to do this to create the fiscal space, even if we already decreased the MPBF by 36 billion, and we decreased the PGF. MPBF is Miscellaneous Personnel Benefits Fund. And then we also decreased the Pension and Gratuity Fund by 40.2 billion pesos, Mr. President. And in addition to those decreases, we had to transfer programmed appropriations to unprogrammed to create additional fiscal space, Mr. President?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, so my concern, Mr. President, is pati pala PhilHealth. We also decreased the PhilHealth budget by 40 billion, Mr. President, among others, Mr. President. So,
Yes, I just want to address that point about PhilHealth. PhilHealth is around 600 billion monies, Your Honor. So I don't think it will have an adverse effect, that decrease you mentioned, Your Honor. Just for the record.
yes, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, siguro we will just have to look at the details of the budget once these are properly and well disseminated already, Mr. President. Ako lang, ang concern ko lang po na rin-raise dito is itong budget practice po na lately nakikita ko po na ang nakakargahan po natin is the unprogrammed appropriations. Although I know that the the explanation is this is just a standby appropriation, but as I have pointed out to my staff, my legislative staff, the Constitution does not distinguish when it says that Congress may not increase the appropriations proposed by the President for the operations of the government. More or less, ganun yung words. Appropriations po ang salita ron. Hindi naman niya, hindi dinistinguish na programmed or unprogrammed appropriations. Because in reality, some unprogrammed appropriations are actually funded, Mr. President, and they become actual expenses of the government, Mr. So I'm just worried with this practice, Mr. President, kasi from 281.9 billion, ang ending 731.4 billion, definitely that was not envisioned by the executive branch, Mr. President. Proposal ng executive branch, 281.9 billion pesos an unprogrammed appropriation. So there was no way when the executive branch was designing and coming up with the budget, with the NEP, that they envisioned the ending na unprogrammed appropriations would be 731.4 billion pesos, Mr. President. So that's just a concern that I am raising, Mr. President, because I also observed this last year, actually, Mr. President. So
Yes, I understand the point of the distinguished minority leader, and I don't want to debate on him that because he's a much better lawyer than I am, Mr. President.
well, anyway, Mr. President, that's the, sabi natin, gray area, or at least ginagawa kong gray area, Mr. President. And then, isa pang practice po natin, isang practice din na napapansin ko is yung pagkatapos ng BICAM, ang laki ng increase ng budget ng House of Representatives, Mr. President, another increase of 12.5 billion pesos. Ganito rin last year ang nangyari. So, siguro, we have to improve our budgeting system, Mr. President, that if this is the actual need of the House, 28.6 billion pesos, sana from the very start, sa GAB pa lang, na-reflect na po yun, Mr. President, so that we are, when we discuss the budget amounts, yun na yung amount na nasa isip po natin, Mr. President. So just a suggestion that as much as possible to improve the transparency of our budget process, Mr. President.
Yes, I see the point of the gentleman, Mr. President, and perhaps they could take it up or we could mention it to the DBM because it's between the Congress and the DBM. Kasi meron daw budget ng 29 congressmen na hindi na isama daw dun sa budget ng House.
But this also happened last year, Mr. President. So
Yes,
sana we learn from past experiences. At any rate, Mr. President, so I'd like to thank our sponsor for responding to my questions and so for being so patient and understanding with this representation, Mr. President.